All right, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for Thursday Talks. We're delighted that today's talk will focus on the work of Arlene Mejorado and will be a conversation between Arlene and Christina Fernandez. Before the program begins, we at UCR ARTS would like to respectfully acknowledge and recognize our responsibility to the original and current caretakers of this land, water, and air. The Cahuilla, Gabrielino Tongva, and Luiseño and Serrano peoples, and all of their ancestors and descendants, past, present, and future. Today, this meeting place is home to many Indigenous peoples from all over the world, including UCR faculty, students, and staff, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to live and work on these homelands. Today's talk is the second in a series of talks around the exhibition Tierra Entre Medio, which is at the Culver Center of the Arts through April 2nd, 2023. Tierra Entre Medio is a multi-generational exhibition that foregrounds 4 Chicana photographers working in Southern California. It features new works by Christina Fernandez installed alongside works by Arlene Mejorado, Lizette Olivas, and Heidi Ortiz. Tierra is organized by UCR ARTS and is curated by Christina Fernandez with Joanna Szupinska, senior curator. The exhibition is organized in conjunction with Christina Fernandez Multiple Exposures, a major survey exhibition concurrently on view at the California Museum of Photography until February 5th, 2023. So please come see both of them. And I will turn it over now to Joanna to introduce our guests.
Hello, thank you for joining us today. It's my pleasure to introduce our esteemed guest today. Arlene Mejorado is an LA-based multidisciplinary artist whose practice spans analog and digital photography, video, and installation. Her work employs documentary forms, visual media, everyday materials, and repurposed documents to counter cultural erasure and to document personal, collective, diasporic, and migrant experiences and stories. Arlene earned her BA in Latin American Studies from the University of Texas, Austin, and is currently an MFA candidate in visual arts at UCSD. Christina Fernandez is a Los Angeles-based photographer whose practice explores issues related to migration, labor, gender, Mexican-American identity, and the unique capacities of the photographic medium. She earned her BA at UCLA in 1989 and her MFA at CalArts in 96. She is associate professor at Cerritos College, Norwalk, where she has been on faculty since 2001. And I'm so grateful to her for bringing Arlene's work to the museum. So I'll invite you on now.
Well, thank you for that, guys. So I'm just gonna let Arlene take over from here and show us her work, and then we'll have a conversation after her presentation and a question and answer period after.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Joanna, Lindsay, and Christina for having me. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So I'll start by sharing my screen. Let me all right, here we go. Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm excited to do this talk with you. I got to really spend some time and think about how I wanted to present my work. And I'm going to be working backwards a bit, timeline-wise, and start with some of the more recent work that I'm doing, and then kind of move into something a little more, going back in the years of my practice. So I think that's a good way to start. I wanted to start with this work that I've been doing, Desterrando Archivos. Some of this work is featured in Tierra Entre Medio, which is the work that we have at Culver. And we have here this image. It's called El Patio de Abuela, or Grandmother's Patio. And I wanted to kind of ground us in this place because this image is a photograph that I made in my grandmother's patio that really continues to speak to me, and is where I've kind of branched into making other photographs. It is in the city of Guadalajara. It's it's an old house that was a piece of land that was purchased in the 1960s, and unlike a lot of the rest of the urban landscape, it is very different. It has not been updated or upgraded. It's a house that is not inhabited the way it was before. We have these old trees that were there that were planted by my grandmother when the land was purchased, and they continue to bear fruit and give off lots of guavas. You have these plátanos in the back that also are kind of unusual in that specific neighborhood, being so central to downtown now. Although when the land was purchased, it was not. So this yard, this patio, has been one that I've always heard in conversations growing up, and you know, it would kind of take off in my imagination of what this patio was and what it smelled like and what it looked like and what happened here. But me being in Los Angeles, hearing about the stories, it was also a place that I often had to transport myself to through my imagination. And so to come back, you know, now as a grown adult in my 30s, and to spend time here and to photograph it, to get to know it, has really been kind of a launchpad for me to learn so much. Here we have a portrait, just one of the, you know, the kind of portraits called the Nuevo Retrato Familiar, or New Family Photograph, where I started to make photographs with young people in my family, especially like young femmes in my family that spend time with me when I'm there in Guadalajara. And in this case, I thought, you know, what is the ongoing archive, or what is a new archive, or how do we extend the archive? Look, I've spent so much time looking at family photographs, and then I thought, you know, like, what if we just start making photographs the way we see in our family albums? And I thought about it as an interesting way to kind of reorder the family a little bit, or resituate us within the family, and who is kind of centered. Thinking about, you know, a lot of the young people, you know, within a lot of family dynamics often are a bit overlooked, or not really seen as the people that need to be at the center. And so I thought about this as being kind of a way to do that. And there's a level of performance, I think, that goes into us being in front of the camera. You have, you know, again, some of my nieces and younger family members have kind of, when I invite them to come to make photographs in my grandmother's home, kind of are the people that open me up to play and to enter the space and differently. You know, I think that I've learned a lot through them, and their confidence, and ways that they, you know, come to the space and eat fruit, or, like, you know, get on top of the roof, which is where we made this photograph. That kind of is like a very liberating way, you know, and a different way to kind of become acquainted with this place that we all kind of are descent from, but don't really know very well. And we're kind of making like a new way to coexist with it, or to relate to it. So this is Tanya arriba de la casa, or Tanya on top of the house, and Tanya's on the roof, and it was just a portrait that we made while there. This is Liliana. We kind of staged this against the wall, on top of the house as well. And here we're just staging and playing within this house that, and like learning its infrastructure and its bones, and opening it up. Here we uncovered the roof vent, and here we have one of my nieces kind of playing with their hands, and we're staging this and making photographs. Here we have a portrait of Panchito, who covered himself with a reflective tarp, and this is also like in front of the house. Here we took we planned out this photograph based on stories. There's many stories that are descent from like central and western Mexico, indigenous practices of bearing your belly button in the land that you're born, in your home. My mother was a home birth. A lot of my family members were home births in this house. And the tradition was that my grandma practiced was bearing the belly button when it falls off and in the ground somewhere. And so we staged this, and we actually acquired the belly button of my nephew, and I just wanted to visualize and see like, what does that mean? And that kind of started to open up new questions around like, you know, what is in the ground, what is actually living in the patio, and what is the patio like kind of archiving for us. I grew up with a lot of stories about overhearing stories about our family just burying things in the patio. Here we have a photograph, viendo el fragmento de un retrato. So this is a fragment of a photograph of like my oldest living relative that I have, and I'm holding it up against the wall. And this, you know, thinking this is here in the patio, and I'm holding it. And it's one of the first times actually that a part of me is actually in front of the camera as well, with the way that I made this photo with, it was a Mamiya 645, I believe. And so with it, I'm just starting to think a lot about the wall and the trying to see through, but like meeting that kind of resistance or those barriers and trying to know more. But somehow like just holding up the photograph, I feel like there's a few different things happening here, in terms of possibly like it being like a portal, or possibly being kind of a way to break through, but also it's like what you see and what you want to project onto like the surface or this place that holds information, but information you can't fully know. And so within that work, this kind of, here is an iteration of a work that I expanded into with this patio concept. And here it's an installation I did at UCSD. And you have a few images that I installed there that are part of this body of work. And these are photographs from Los Angeles in the kitchen, fotografías de Los Ángeles en la cocina. And they're images that I brought from Los Angeles to, I brought them to the kitchen in my grandmother's home in Guadalajara and installed them there. And when I was putting these photographs together to print them, I actually was really interested in, I started to, play with the repetition. And then I started to see that there was this like kind of interesting pattern happening here where that kind of reminded me of like film. And these are all pictures of like just daily life, in Los Angeles. These are all people that, have a relationship to this home, but their lives were lived elsewhere. Our lives unfolded in Los Angeles, in the San Fernando Valley. And, these images all kind of mark a little piece of that. And I thought about like, what does it mean to like kind of bring back those images and to stage them in the kitchen, and install them in a place that that none of us inhabit anymore. And then here you have niña sosteniendo retrato de mi mamá de joven, or girls holding a photograph of my mother when she was young. And this is an image, again, playing with my nieces. This was a portrait of my mother, and she's in the ocean. And it's just a really beautiful photograph. And I think of my mom as, somebody that was very much kind of a person that, based on knowing her personality, like someone that dreams a lot and kind of aspires to a lot. And I just wanted to kind of think about her at this younger age. And so connecting to her and understanding her better through her archives is something that I think you'll see through my practice. And so here we staged this photo, and this was a bit of an accident, but we have some of my nieces are kind of just holding up the photograph, and it just really made me think about a lot of things, about the ways we can touch archive photographs, family photos, the ways that they kind of weather and deteriorate, but at the same time are being activated and loved on and like used, and that's kind of like when objects are alive, is how I understand that to be. And so, obviously there's this like tenderness there with the colors and kind of that intergenerational, like maybe conversation happening with this image. Then I started to lean a little bit more into like self-portraits within the work. So here you have autorretrato en la entrada de su casa, and I say in her home, or su casa, because it's my grandmother's home. you know, but this is kind of me just being in the space and trying to see what it's like. This home that I often visit and never really saw a lot of people there or bodies. And so like, what is it like to start to enter the space and really build a relationship to it, and document through that process. This is within the exhibition, or not exhibition, sorry, the installation that I did at the gallery at UCSD recently. And you have Tijuana family photograph installed among banana trees. So it's, I'm not sure how well you can see here, but it's basically a photograph that I printed enlarged, that I found of my family, mostly like women in my family in Tijuana, and then I installed it. And these are all people that were born in Guadalajara, have a relationship to Guadalajara, but all like left, you know? And so in no sense, I'm bringing back like this photograph, installing it among the banana trees in the patio. And that was what I photographed. So again, it was a way to kind of engage with the space, be in the space, and like allow for my photo and my presence to be a bit inseparable from the space, by working with it and doing these kind of like small interventions in the space, around bringing photographs and maybe like memory and moments that are attached to this place in some way. And so then I made that photograph, and then I started to become interested in really thinking about the brick and the grass and what was alive and how lush the patio is. And so I started to work with growing growing grass and moss on bricks, you know, because I was really interested in that. And somehow it worked, and I installed it, and I thought about it as almost this kind of objects that are spilling out of the photograph, or maybe the way the photograph is kind of just draped like a curtain, and it's printed on two light but long bond paper prints, and then kind of and then placed on this piece of wood. So it just kind of like moved a bit like a curtain, and it was kind of floating, and then you have these like heavy bricks on the bottom. And I just thought about that as this like grounding element, but you have like a play between the green live objects that I had to continuously water and take care of, to keep them alive in the gallery. And then you have this photo, you know, that is just a view, or it's like a sight into what the patio actually is. And this is just kind of a detail on the found bricks. The bricks I gathered from different people's backyards, because I, you know, and then just growing on them. And then another image that was in that installation was the cortina con mujeres trabajando, or curtain with women working. And in this image you have on the right side, you have a photograph of my mother, and she's working in a maquila in the San Fernando Valley. So, you know, when she migrated and moved here and you know, worked many years in this particular factory. And then on the left side, you have my mom in the lunchroom with a lot of other women, that I think kind of helps to maybe place her among, you know, and with many other women that were doing the same kind of work. But I wanted to print on fabric. I like, you know, this kind of material that is kind of more malleable, and kind of the way the photograph, what you see and the shape of it is determined by the material, that is not flat. And so I thought about a curtain, because I think of like curtains as being a domestic object, and especially this type of curtain reminds me of a lot of the kinds of curtains I see in Guadalajara, or, you know, in Mexico. And so I thought, like, you know, what is it like to put these images like that I have of working women on the curtain itself. And then, so then this image kind of extends into the patio. And again, I kind of did this like broken grid type of plane with the patio bricks, and then you had guayabas. There's guayabas that I brought from my grandmother's home, placed with like fresh fruit. Guayabas that I acquired in San Diego. And so then those were all just kind of placed kind of randomly throughout the gaps of the brick. And I just think of it as kind of this kind of more deconstructed memory plane of a relationship with this potent smell of the guayabas and the fruit that's in different stages of its life. And then you have this grid of bricks that have gaps in them, and like, you know, so I just wanted to think about that in relationship also to photographs. This is after all the bricks were removed. You just see the remnants of like where they were, and then and then I left the guayabas. I removed those last, and so I wanted to also document what that looked like about these the evidence of something that was there that's gone. And lastly, within this space, you had these other images here. First, you have these two, this kind of a diptych that I did with my nieces. You know, my mom had two sisters that grew up in this home, and I've heard endless stories again in it, but there's still so much that I can only speculate and not fully know. And there's not, and so, you know, there's also this kind of gap in the archive of like, you know, what images exist of this time of seeing them together. And so with my nieces, we were doing different kinds of photographs. I was really interested in the texture of the front of the house, the kind of stucco, really rough texture that exists there, that actually I feel connected to very much because it resembles a lot of the topography in the San Fernando Valley. But, you know, we did this image in front of the house, and it's like the three, so you have these three people here that you mainly only access them or see them through their hair. And so it creates a bit of a, you know, like there's a lot of information that's withheld there, but it also opens up a window to like so much more speculation because the information is not so defined in the photographs. And same thing with the one on the right. And I don't really say who this is because it could be a lot of different people, but it's someone in my family just kind of being stationed in front of the window of the house. And so when I was in the patio, like spending time in the patio over the last, you know, trips that I've been going back, I decided to dig up what was underneath the ground, see what we would find. And we did a few holes, me and my nephew, and like we found some objects, and we found these remnants of shoe making because my family, they were shoemakers. We found remnants of seamstress work. We found toys, you know, evidence of children that lived in the home, broken plates, you know, from the kitchen possibly, and spoons. And so I thought about, like, it was just interesting the ways that, you know, even with just digging up a little bit, because, you know, my family would talk about how things would get discarded in the home, you know, and sometimes they would just get buried because there wasn't a place necessarily to put things in. And so I thought that was interesting. And then it really made me think about how much the home was a place of labor and work. The home is a laboratory for work, for these type of art craftsmanships to grow and develop and become stronger, and for places of commerce, you know, for work. And so I just thought about, like, what is the domestic space, and you know, what is the evidence there? And I think about a lot of my family having multiple trades that I think, considering like myself, this artist in the family, and that someone that maybe is a bit confusing for family members, but the ways that, like, I'm not really far from the roots of who they were, you know, people that learned how to make things and do things, and required a creative skill sets to be able to do. And so I kind of want to, like, I think this photo kind of helped to reinforce that for me. And I liked playing with the idea of looking down, because that's how you experience the photo, and that's how the photo was made. So this is a photo that you have to stand over to see it. And you see the mimic of the way I embalmed the bricks with a layer of dirt. The dirt is like stuck on the bricks, and yeah. And then I just wanted to share this image as like another iteration of that. When I started making this work in Guadalajara, I was able to install it in a gallery space called Tiro Blanco. And this was an iteration that was created by Erika Hirogami. And we worked in the gallery, and I was able to install this on the ground, and also actually brought in bricks that are from the patio of my grandmother. And so when I brought in the bricks, they had like bits of moss and they were moist, and and I just really liked thinking about that with the photograph, and like moving it from the wall and putting it in this other context. And and then lastly, with this work, with this iteration that I did in Guadalajara, this was where I just mounted lots of family photographs onto this corner of the gallery space with the bricks brought in from the patio. And you start to see the kind of building off of each other of the bricks, because moving up, and then you have different archives, both older archives and new archives. There's images that here that are ones that we were making during my time in Guadalajara, and then you have images that are brought from different family albums and borrowed from different family collections. And so now I'll move into another project that also some of these images are in Tierra Entre Medio, and it's called Breathing Exteriors, Replacements of Memory. And with this work, I think here I'm working with printing our family photographs and archives on vinyl banners, and then installing them in different spaces within the San Fernando Valley of Los Angeles. So within this work, I wanted to kind of create an incentive to return to these spaces that I think about a lot, that kind of stay encapsulated in my memory, but are not necessarily places that I'm interacting with a lot on regularly. So I, through going through our family archive collection of photos that we have, like selected specific ones, usually like in collaboration with like my mother or my aunt or my cousin, and then printing those and installing them, and kind of really thinking about the ways that businesses design themselves, the way like people in the community like create visual culture and language, and so using the vinyl banner, I thought would be a really strong gesture to the ways that public spaces can also be private space. And so here you have these images of, in this case, I don't have an actual image of like my mom when she was in this beauty school. So I found the closest thing I could find is a photograph of her when she was practicing hair, doing hair like in our bedroom, and so then that's the photograph I chose, and I installed it in front of this beauty school that I always wonder about and think about, because I know she went to this beauty school. As you can see, it's closed down, but it was in Panorama City, and I don't hide necessarily from like the little clips on the top right corner that are holding up the image, or but it's an opportunity to kind of to work in the space and have people walk by and look at it and ask questions. And so then that's the photograph that I make, is the photograph of this landscape with something that indicates like an actual kind of connection to that landscape. You have here another one, living room dance. And in this one, I actually think a lot about the kind of like family parties that we had. And I found these photographs of me and my cousins dancing, and my grandma's in the photograph. But like, what's important here is just the way that you can see a place from the exterior and kind of transport into the interior through the photograph. And thinking about places that are not the same, that when you return to them, they're not what they were, and the ways that they're encapsulated for you in your mind are not what they are when you return. Here is an image, my cousin Anna's apartment. And so Anna was the first teenager that grew up in the United States. So I feel like she opened a lot of ground for a lot of us to kind of, you know, make this our home and make this a place for ourselves in Los Angeles. And so she, I was, you know, she has a really rich archive of herself as a teenager. And so through courtesy of her, we selected this image of her in her bedroom, and we installed it in front of the apartment building where she lived, where this photograph was made. And through it, I'm able to kind of really more spend time in this place that we don't have access to anymore because she doesn't live there anymore. But like thinking about her at this time period in her life, you know, and what that meant and what it meant for me as someone looking up to her, you know, because she would always come to my house, and to be able to go to her environment, her home, you know, and install it there. It was a way to kind of open more into what her life was like, you know. You have here in Children's Party. This one is an image of this home is one I don't necessarily have access to today, but I was able to install this in the alleyway of the house, which is an alleyway that we always found to be mysterious, and we're told to stay away from the alleyway. So for me, coming back and installing this photograph in the backyard, in the alleyway instead of the front yard, is kind of the closest I can get to the place where this photograph was made, without, like, you know, disrupting people that live there. And I was also drawn to this photograph. One, it's again a photograph of a party of me and my cousins doing something that we don't necessarily get to do as much anymore, because this is when our family was more newly arrived, and we had a lot of parties, and parties were such an important part of like our sustainability and the infrastructure of our family, and as kind of more newly arrived migrants. And so then you have this party with a piñata. But what was interesting too was in the photograph, which you can see someone taking the photograph. And so I thought that was interesting because it's rare that there's actually like a photograph or documentation of someone making the archive. And so here you have like my aunt who's taking a photograph. And so I was also really drawn to that for that reason, because you're witnessing her in the photograph making what is our family archive. Winter Feast. This was done in Reseda, California, again in front of the home, where I vividly remember, even at this very young, us having like practicing Thanksgiving, like what is that, and like learning that through having this like patio feast, you know, and covering the house and with like the open part of the patio with tarp, so that to keep, I guess, a little bit more warm and when it's cold. And you know, you just have this image of that, and it's like our family doing this, and it's something that we don't necessarily do the same because of things like assimilation that happen when, you know, families move here. And so I wanted to kind of, you know, install this in the space again, like always wondering what it was like. And again, this is as close as I can really get to this house because we don't live there anymore. And then this one is a photograph that was made right here in this very fence on the other side, of course. And I made the photograph through the alleyway. And it's a photograph of my mom. It's called My Mother Madonna. And she talks about this photograph as one when she was dressing like Madonna. And I thought it was really interesting, you know, to her being so dressed up and being so like just beautiful and elegant, and having this really kind of pop culture aesthetic to her look always. And then and the ways that she presented herself, and you have this like alleyway and like rubble behind her, and then coming back to this place, I wanted to kind of, I was always curious about what it looked like now, and you know, how did this yard look. And so I installed it again in the same place. And then lastly, this one is called Swimming Pool Self-Portrait, and it was made in North Hills. And this is a photograph I found of myself. And I thought about, it made me think about like who makes photographs, who makes your childhood photographs and the photographs of yourself. And I thought, like, what does it mean to me for me to try to like maybe re-photograph myself? And so I printed it really large. And then the neighborhood pool I didn't have access to anymore. So I went to a local pool at the park nearby. And this was during the pandemic. So the pools were drained at the time, and I was able to install it there. And that's where I was able to make this one. And so it's kind of me photographing myself again. And then this will move into another project. This is Caricias, and I did this work at the LA Metro. Well, it's not a project that started at the LA Metro, but LA Metro selected it to have it at their light boxes in Hollywood and Highland. Caricias is a project that I started in 2019, where I'm working with, well, first I started with meeting a friend named Barbara, and Barbara does these kinds of performances. They're tribute performances that happen at tent parties and throughout Los Angeles, and it's like Paquita la del Barrio, or she'll dress up like Jenny Rivera. And so, you know, following her and going to parties and documenting that, I became really interested in the ways that a lot of like Spanish speaking Latinx communities like are, you know, getting really introduced to like this kind of queer performance culture and drag culture, and also being transported to this like place of being in proximity to their idols and like these Latinx divas that we love and, you know, so much in our community. And so I was really interested in the story and the ways that, you know, the ways that these parties create like a platform for like this kind of embrace and acceptance of queerness as well. And also like, what do these party performers kind of bring to kind of these spaces and kind of rupture like heteronormative like ways of celebration, and the ways that these trends have grown a lot with going from maybe more demand for like banda and tambora and this kinds of music to like really wanting to feel like you're in a room with, you know, Juan Gabriel, or you know, like Rocío Dúrcal. And so through that, we've been making these photographs, and you have pictures like this with Yossi Love and Moni Leon dressed like Juan Gabriel, and here you have Rocío Dúrcal. And this is a photograph made like in the back of a seafood restaurant kitchen. You know, we're on a Sunday. They perform as these you know, amazing beloved divas in our community, and like the ways that they do that, and for like families on a typical Sunday having, you know, seafood in East LA. And here you have Barbara, who's doing like Paquita la del Barrio, and this is kind of at like a wedding party, and one of these like kind of tarp covered parties that happen. And then you have this kind of portrait here of Maori, who also does a lot of performances, but here she's just being we were outside, and it was beautiful, the reflection on the window of Hollywood where she lives, and the palm trees and the colors kind of really brought her out, and so yeah. And then you have like here Yossi Love as also dressed like Paquita la del Barrio. And this is a photograph like in an alleyway, like right before she's about to go on. So I'm realizing like I make a lot of photographs in alleyways, and I'm wondering like what that means. But and then you have also like just audience members that are you know, part of the photograph, you know, because I think that this is a project that's not only centering like the queer talent that comes to the parties, but also the desire and the kind of like strive for this kinds of entertainment by mothers and families, the people that come to witness this and like post it on Facebook Live, and so all of that, like kind of thinking about the disrupting or the undoing of these kinds of barriers between communities that happen during these kinds of parties. This is just a behind the scenes documentation of when the work was installed, of our enthusiasm and, kind of like our pride for seeing these images so large in Hollywood and Highland, and like this really important intersection, where people are having, just their everyday lives and commuting. And I think that like, that's part of what I think these individuals bring to people is kind of like that transporting to another place, during a party. Yeah. And so I'm not sure how we are on time, but I can keep going. This is another project I have. Let's see. So this is, and I wanted to just take you back because I think this is an important project that when I started with, called La Pulga, and it's one I did in 2017, and it's very dear to me. And I think a lot of people that have been following my work know this work of mine, and it's boutique flea market. That's where I started it, and it was when I lived in San Antonio, Texas. Okay, and so these are just images that I started to make because I was homesick and I lived in San Antonio, and I was spending a lot of time at the flea markets. Growing up, like my mom had a puesto at the flea market selling toys, and so I always, when I go to any kind of outdoor market or tianguis or swap meet, I always, I have a point of reference through my childhood for it, and an affinity for it, and so I would go a lot to them, and I thought like, San Antonio flea markets are just so incredible. They're these beautiful places of where people vend and run their businesses, but it's where all the cultural convergence with that, and dancing and going, especially on Sundays, was really special because, and I don't know if that's a Texas thing, but it's, people go often in their Sunday's best, and they go to show out and like to be seen, and it's a place where people can exude their pride and their culture, and again with music and dance. So I wanted to photograph that, and it's kind of a celebratory documentary project. As you can see, working backwards through my work, my foundation is in documentary, and that's where I started. Doing portraits and doing environmental portraits and these kinds of just images and landscapes and still lifes in these spaces, and looking at all of that as really interested always in like beauty. And while I was doing these flea market portraits, I decided to, set up a booth or rent a booth and set up an actual like studio on the space. I was really inspired by the work of Stefan Ruiz, who did something similar in Monterrey. And so through that, I had already built a repertoire with the people in the flea market. People knew me as the girl with the camera, or they knew me by name. And so I was able to kind of like over time set up a date with many people and encourage them to come to have their portrait made. So I wasn't as strange by then, but even then, there's still a lot of people that don't want to, and then there's people that do. And so we did all these portraits, and people just get a picture afterwards, and then yeah, this turned into, eventually we did this zine called La Pulga, and we had kind of an exhibition in San Antonio, and also we did like a lot of like public wheat pasting of images from La Pulga, and so this was published with Deep Red Press. Shout out to Raul. And so yeah, this was one of like an early project that I did in 2017. And then I'll end with this project because I believe for myself, as a photographer, your work doesn't begin or end with photography making. It's also about all of the work and infrastructure to help sustain an ecosystem for photographers, especially photographers of color. And so for me, working with Optica, my role shifts a little bit more as like an editor and as a zine maker. And I work with Este Press, Jesse Castillo, and this is our newest zine that we have. We've done three editions, and each edition is amazing, and it's all about having photographers kind of be in proximity to each other through pages, and kind of creating this connection between photographers, maybe on different coasts, or but it really centers queer, femme, also people of color, Black, Indigenous, POC artists that are making images, and for us to not have to wait to get published or to get noticed, but to have this just be one more avenue for which we can like experience work in this really beautiful, intimate way, which is through pages, through flipping through pages. And so this is, one of the other works that I do in addition to making my own photographs. So yeah, that's what I have. I'll stop sharing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Arlene. So I want to go back to, the images from Unearthing Archives, but before we do that, can you talk a little bit about your journey from being a more sort of documentary photographer to, working on these more family-oriented, performative, conceptual projects that you're doing now?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's definitely been this progression, I think. I think there's certain questions that I wrestle with that I think persist throughout the work, and the approach possibly changes, but the questions kind of persist. And I think through the beginning of thinking, when I started with working with the flea markets, I was definitely drawn to thinking about, like the kind of my upbringing and the ways that what the flea market was in terms of this place where you can work and also like still be with your children. And I think of like, I have this really fond memory of it because my mom was always working. And so it was the only time I ever saw her working where I could be with her. And so I liked seeing like, these, seeing that. And so I felt connected to it. And I was always like, but of course there's so much more that you start to learn about the flea markets, but that was like the initial connection to it. It was the kind of going back and trying to understand that, like, what was the environment that allows for that, for things to not be so separated. And then moving into, so then you do this, I did this like documentary practice, and then I think I just started to ask questions about like, why can't, like, I started to kind of want to contest this idea that like photography is supposed to be solely observational. And I started to think about the ways that like you are in the photograph, and like maybe if you start from that point, or like kind of accept that like you are engaged in the space, you are not invisible, you are part of it. Like from moving from that place, like a lot was possible, and there was a lot to move around with, like in that space. So then I went into really thinking about like, how can I really work with a space and not feel like I'm coming in and making photographs and leaving, but like, how can I be almost inseparable from the photograph, inseparable from the space? Like, how can I almost earn my place in this landscape, and be there, and so I think like I wanted to do things that also felt more tactile, and like I could touch the space, and like I didn't want photographs that felt like removed, and so I think when I started working with the banners, like that's what you see there. You see that I, you have to spend time and strategize and hang the work and deal with various circumstances that come up, and be a bit at at mercy of the space, you know, for the kinds of images that you'll end up making. And then going into, you know, the work with the Cerrando Archivos and the work in the patio in my grandmother's home, it was just, I think, like the most like fully executed version of that, of like not just that, but like let's also work with family members and have you know, like more staging and more playing and like you know, and yeah, so it's just been growing from there. But I think about that a lot, and just it all kind of goes back to like how far can I go with photography, but and my like kind of involvement in the frame now.
Well, you know, I definitely see like the path or the lineage, you know, from your more documentary work to the work that you're working on now. But there's a very definite pivot, you know, from, as you say, that observational practice to turning the camera around, right? And you're dealing with your family legacy, the home, your nieces, you're collaborating with them and performing with them, or having them in a sense perform for you. And then with the other work, with the breathing exteriors, you're taking photographs, family photographs, um, you know, of your aunts, of your mother, of your grandmother, and you know, working with those. I see these like sort of multiple stages that you're dealing with your family legacy, you know, in different ways. But it's the camera's completely turned around, you know, instead of that observational stance that you had with your documentary work.
Mm.
And I'm just wondering, was there a moment where you said, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to do this documentary work. Or is it like, I'm just interested in doing another project and you will always do documentary work?
That's a really good question. I mean, like I should mention, I worked as a photojournalist for about 7 years, and I would say a turning point for me was probably the pandemic. I think that before the pandemic, I was really trying to say, how can you really tell a story through making photographs of what you see, and have like this really sharp eye, and really have, you know, make a photograph at the right moment. And I think that with the pandemic, I started to crave like working with photographs in a different way, because I had this yearn to touch, you know, and to touch and to touch textures, environment, and to like kind of just like remove barriers, any kind of barriers, because I think during the pandemic we were all like, there were so many barriers that were placed on us. And so you know, that's why you can see a lot of that work started in 2020. You know, it was like finding a way to do that. So I would say during that time, and then from there I just felt kind of like very free, you know, because I felt like, you know, with documentary there's these very respected rules of how to engage with it, and they're there. I understand why they're there, like some of that, but at the same time, I think I also started to really think about like, you know, I am an artist leaning into photography through the, you know, but what is it like for me as an artist to kind of push past that, and to work more in a way that is more intuitive, you know, and more about like also like accepting that there are sometimes ways that I sometimes sketch a photograph, or sometimes like I see something before I do it. And so what's necessarily not just being reactive to what is in sight and what is there, but also what do I envision, you know? And I wanted to kind of push past like just working with what's handed to you or what's there, but also work with like what you want to see or what you see really. And so that's where like also documentary, you know, if I'm only using the tools of documentary, like sometimes it's limiting of the reality that I'm trying to actually convey. And so what does it mean to do things that are not necessarily with like what's necessarily present, but feel more real to you than just working with what is in front of you. Yeah.
I think that's what's really impressive for me anyways, with the Unearthing Archives photographs. I really feel like, you know, what you're capturing there in those images is something that we all experience, which is, you know, we remember our childhood or remember events and places of our childhood. Sometimes the strangest little snippet of a visual image is there, and that's all attached usually to some type of emotion, right? And I think you really do a very good job of capturing that. You know, it's very evocative, and you can almost, even though they're photographs, you can almost smell and feel that patio, right? Which, can we go back to the patio image? I know it's like way in the beginning.
Oh yeah, of course. Let me share the screen and let's see. Oh, let's see. Sorry. You want the first image, the first patio image?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. There it is.
I mean, for me, this is a stage. I look at this image and I feel like this is the stage. It's not just your grandmother's patio. It's a stage where all these memories are going to eventually be performed, right? Eventually in your work. And so I think this is a very key, important image. What were you thinking when you photographed your grandmother's patio? And did you understand at the time that this was going to be something that you were going to expand upon and really use as a thematic in this work?
Well, being that this is a place that is regionally far away, it's in Guadalajara, like I have to take flights, you know, to go there and spend time and set up trips. And so the work has been constructed over a period of 2 years, and I think 4 trips now over there. And so with each one, you know, this is probably one of the first trips where I made this photograph. And this was made during the summer when the fruit is in full bloom. Like there's lots of fruit. There is, you know, the patio's covered, and I thought about, like, when I was there, my cousin, you know, kind of starts like sweeping up and trying to in her mind make the place a little bit more presentable. And I was like, no, like, don't, like, please don't move the fruit. Like, I was fascinated with the way that the patio, even as my family, you know, lives in Los Angeles, the majority of them, and is like, you know, some of us have our home, some of us don't have our home, or some of us have been displaced, some of us have moved around, some of us are renters. Like there's a couple of homeowners, but not really in my family, you know, and like thinking about that and the way that this house is talked about by the neighborhood, by sometimes our family is like, oh, what are we going to do with this house that's like falling apart and deteriorating? And then you go there and I'm just like, how has this place been the most kind of self-sustained, self-preserving space, you know, through its own small ecology that exists within this urban, you know, a place, but like the way that, you know, and you can read time through it. Like you can see that the bricks have evolved. I mean, my grandmother told me that this piece of land started with like them making adobe bricks and building it out. And now you see then to the point where you see like concrete bricks, you know, and cinder blocks at the top. And so you can see that in the place. You can see like the pieces of aloe vera and like the way that they've been cut over time. And but these trees are so old and they keep giving, and when we grab the fruit, one of the trees gives good fruit, and the other one, my cousins say like, oh, the fruit doesn't give good tree, the tree doesn't give good fruit because it's so old, you know. And I just think about that, but it still keeps giving fruit. And even patios in this neighborhood specifically that have access to the dirt and the ground, there's very few. A lot of patios are completely covered in tile or concrete at this point. And so all of that I think is important. And somehow I guess I wanted to understand, how is this patio a system of preservation on its own without so much human intervention, you know. And how is it that, and at the same time, like, this place that becomes this mythical place for me growing up, what is it like when that meets me physically being there, and what is actually there? And so I start to get a lot of things become undone. A lot of what I assume or presumed about it, or my sentiment that I project onto it, starts to change when you have to, when you're smelling it, when you're working with it, when, you know, like, you're reading into it, you're seeing everything that it is, you know. It starts to change, and that, I think, is part of what also was being documented. And also, again, I have to really give credit to my nieces and nephews, you know, that come with me, and I know the meaning of, you know, young people on their summer break just tagging along with you. It's like, oh, what are we going to do with our aunt? You know, it's like, oh, we're going to go make photographs. Okay, like, and now whenever I go back, like, they talk about that, and we remember that, and now we've constructed memories of our own in this place that we didn't grow up with, but we don't only have to you know, think about or have like just only the memories of our parents, you know, or our aunts, and like those stories, like, although those are important, like, we also have our moments there. Like, it's very different, but, you know, it gives us more of a sense of, I guess, like, connection, you know, and to it as well.
Yeah, there's something definitely, you know, there's something definitely important about a physical connection, because, you know, in your photographs, a lot of times the wall is featured, and you're either touching the wall or casting a shadow on the wall, or you know, leaning up against the wall, taking a photograph. And it's almost as if the wall is some kind of, you know, some kind of skin to something, you know. I just think this series is just so evocative, and I think you capture that thing that only exists in our imagination when we think about our family and have memories. Those small instants, you know, you're making tangible through this work, for you, but for us too, because it starts us thinking about, you know, at least for me anyways, it makes me think about those things, those evocative images, those little snippets of visual image that I have from my childhood and from growing up. And, you know, what does it mean to recapture that, almost in a sense? I feel like that's what this project is about, in a way. And it's great that you have your your family in on it, you know. I think that they're going to be learning a lot about what it is to be like a human being, you know, and to think about and know about your family and your legacy, and you know, also all the important work, right, that was done by our families
Mhm.
to get us to where we are, basically, right?
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for
I,
saying. Mhm.
what was that? I'm sorry.
I really enjoy the way you're reading it and talking about it. Thank you.
uh, yeah, no, I love this work. Um, and then the other thing I wanted to talk about really quickly, if we could go to the breathing exteriors um, images. Let's go to the install shot, I guess.
You wanted the breathing exteriors?
Yeah, there we go. Um, you know, these photographs, I mean, it's hard for me to separate myself from just the fact that I think these photographs are really gorgeous, the sense of light, the color palette. This is first what draws me in, that beautiful sky, the shadow play, you know, the beautiful sort of mint green of the wall. You know, presenting family photographs is such a like tricky thing. They're so personal. How do they get read by other people, right? And what's really interesting to me about this work is I immediately understand and fall into this. Like, I get what you're doing. I didn't need for you to explain that to me. How did you come up with this process? what were you hoping to, you know, what were you hoping for the audience to understand through these photographs?
Yeah, so, I think it's so funny because archive family photographs, we all have photographs, of something in our lives of the past that represents the past. And so these are my archives, but I'm okay with people not knowing the details. I'm okay with people just looking at it and thinking like maybe they have an image like this too somewhere, or, it's a moment in a living room that most of us have experienced, a moment
Exactly,
in a
right? I mean, it's almost universal.
yeah, and so just like placing it like within this project, I'm in the San Fernando Valley, and I'm thinking about these landscapes. To me, like growing up in the valley, it was like, oh, these mundane landscapes of monochromatic buildings and like stucco everywhere, and like a lot of just like boring architecture. Like that's the way I thought about it. And so but then what changes my eye or changes how I saw it, because that's how I experienced it, but what changed my eye is like the sentiment and the connection that I then have to it, the reference point of it, like the way you can kind of like map out a place based on your memories, or what places lead you to this curiosity of what is it like now, or what lives there, like is there like a ghost version of myself left behind, because something happened there and now it's still living, or it's holding on to a piece of me that won't let me go, and so thinking about that, and something that I kind of am interested in moving into more or leaning into with my work, is like thinking also about topography and topographics, or maybe even new topographics, like that reference of the ways that these are just these like landscapes in the valley, in the San Fernando Valley, are just like very like kind of suburban, like open places, and anyone can assign meaning to it. Anyone can assign something to it. And so through this is my way of also saying like, this is what it means to somebody, or this is how we can make a meaning to a place, because that's what makes a space a place. It's like you assign a meaning to it, you mark it in some way, and I put these
As if these,
sorry,
I'm sorry, it's almost as if these places, you're like claiming a slice of time, right? In the history of these places.
Mm-hmm.
And then bringing the present forward, You're claiming two different types of time, right? The past and your specific family in that specific place at that time. And then you're rephotographing it, right? And it's like frozen. It's frozen but active at the same time, which I think is really interesting. We're gonna wrap this up. We're gonna take some questions from people who are asking questions. So I'll read the first one. This is from Nicholas Cesar Colon. Do you think memories can be inherited? How do your projects connect you with the past, present, and future?
Can memories, yes, can memories be inherited? So thanks for the question. So first of all, I think memories are always slightly distorted, or they change over time, or the way you recount a story can change, and then that alters the memory. So I don't think memory is a fixed thing, and some things get passed down. If you are someone that grew up among some kind of storytelling in your family, which is in my case. And then there's the memories that are yours, and then there's the memories that are not your memories. But even if you're growing up hearing stories, they start to become a part of you too, so that's kind of something that I think has informed me. What was the second part of that question? I'm sorry.
And how do your projects connect you with the past, present, and future?
Yeah. So I think there's a level of the work is definitely looking to the past. The work is documenting the present. And I think that there's a level of futurity in my work too, in the sense of like, I am anticipating the loss. I am anticipating the moment of change and the moment that it will not be there.
Yeah.
You know, whether it's my grandmother's patio, it will not, one day that will not be there, because it's the last house in the neighborhood that is like that. Everything is towering over it. It's 2-3 stories high. You know, that is a place that, and it doesn't belong to me, you know, it's not a place that I'm going to inherit. And so the photography, the document.
Who owns that place? Let's go.
I know. That's funny. No, but that's one thing, you know, I think about the futurity in the sense of like the work that I'm making, let's say with like my nieces and nephews, like how is that going to impact them in the future? You know, what will we do with that? And then again, anticipating the change or the moment that things are not there. And I think a lot of my work is informed by loss too. And so I think that going to the past is always going to the future, always. Like there's no that congruency, or that line is always working together. And I understand through growing up with family photographs, being my first photography teachers, art history lessons, you know, the family albums, I understand the impact that photography has on the future. You know, I can learn that through my family, through the home, you know.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I have a lozenge in my mouth. That's what I'm doing. Anyways, okay, so, this is from Sire Cavero. I don't know how to pronounce the first name, but anyways, sorry about that. How has your family interacted with your more recent work?
Oh, good question. My family, so there are different things happening. Like with my family in Mexico, in Guadalajara, who witnessed the photo making and are involved in a lot of the process. I would say the people that are involved in it, which are mostly my nieces and nephews, there's a level of enthusiasm, but then there's things that I think are confusing about, you know, the image making process. But I also, like, a lot of those images are made with film camera, you know, analog process. So for them, I think, you know, they take interest in the camera, but then I also take my digital camera and they make photographs, I make photographs, and then those become a reference point. Like now when I go back, they're like, oh, remember those pictures we made the last time you were here? Like, can we look at them? And then we'll look at those pictures, and then they'll remember things and they'll talk about the photographs that they made. So that is interesting. And then, but another thing is important fact is that I'm one of the only people, well, I'm like the firstborn in the United States in my family, but I grew up very much like transborder, transnational, in the sense of like, to me, there was always like every year, you're always going back. That the practice of returning every year, or finding a way to return, to be with family, to see them, was very much ingrained in me. And so I do that like muscle memory almost, you know, but I would say the people in my family that came after don't practice that. And so I'm one of the only people that continue to return. You know, I have maybe 2 other cousins, and sometimes my mom and sometimes my uncle that kind of do, but like that's like there's no one younger than me in California that is doing that, practicing that. So I think that so I'm somehow preparing for something, I'm not sure what, but like, you know, I have the relationship more with like the people that witnessed the work in Mexico and with people here in California. I mean, my mom is interested in it. Like recently she went in my studio and she just starts picking up the photos and grabbing things and like talking about them. And I think she gets excited to just tell her stories. You know, in terms of the ways that I mesh the work with like my photographs, I think like she finds them interesting, but I don't know, like, you know, sometimes families are not always like super clear on what you're doing. Maybe like in a few years they'll like really understand sometimes. Yeah. But I mean, they're very supportive. Everyone is supportive, and that
they won't always understand, and you know, And sometimes that's frustrating, I think, but you know, if they're supportive, that's half the battle, you know.
Yeah, yeah, they're supportive.
All right, so we're going to do one more question from Mika Castaneda. Love you, beautiful SAG queen, proud of you. I was wondering if you could speak more to the way collaboration is navigated in your work, inspired by the way you acknowledge and speak towards the lives of your family in your work, specifically the young ones.
Yeah. Thank you for that question. Hello, Mika. Yeah, okay. So this, I think, goes back to another question you asked earlier, Christina, around like, how did I move into the kind of photography I'm doing right now from documentary? And that was something that I thought about, was like, where does collaboration begin or end in photography? And I thought like, well, what happens if you just like, if I kind of like let that collaboration really blossom more? And I don't think I'm done necessarily with that, but um, the way that it works in photographs, I would say with the newer work, I think it's kind of like what I've been saying about like seeing how other people enter the space, and like letting that kind of inform how I can enter the space, and kind of like not having full control or power over every image, like letting the accidents happen. And like sometimes those are the images that I think can be really strong. And I think also everything that happens when you're not making the photograph, from when we do the things like sit around and hear stories, or throw a party. We threw a party on the patio one day just to kind of like really activate the place. But those are things like where everybody comes together and everyone has a role and everyone does something to help make that happen. And then that kind of leads into kind of like really meditating on the place I'm making photographs in, and also it helps, So yeah, different people have different roles. And then on top of that, shout out to like my cohort and like people like that, my friends and people that spend time with the work, because I think like people sharing their read on the work and what comes through and what doesn't, like all of that, it determines like what I do next.
Yeah, it's definitely, photography, although it is a click of the shutter, is definitely not a lonesome project, right? It's continually collaborative, for sure.
Yeah, and I
Good
don't
talk.
really work alone. I know a lot of photographers, and it's a medium that really can lend itself to working alone, and
Yeah.
sometimes I can't. But I like to have more people involved in what I'm doing.
It's so much more fun that way,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. Well, Arlene, it was really a pleasure talking to you. And I think that was the last question we can take. So I apologize to other people who had questions. And I think Lindsay's going to come on in.
Yes, I just want to thank you both so much for a fantastic talk. Thank you, Arlene, for sharing your work, and Christina for bringing the work to the museum. I already posted a link to your zine in the chat, and I'll also post the link to our upcoming 2 talks with Lizette from the same exhibition, and then the final talk with Christina. So let me put that in the chat.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I just want to say one last thing I forgot to say at the beginning, was just, please support the strike for student workers, UC wide. We are really fighting for, just wages and living wages for students, disability rights, healthcare, and childcare and different things. So on my social media, I've been sharing ways that people can support also, and specifically my program. So I'll put more information there, but please support the strike, and there's many ways you can get involved and be in solidarity with students.
Thank you for sharing that. And yeah, so I think that will wrap up, but again, thank you so much for a fantastic talk. Come see the exhibition before it closes April 2nd. And then Christina's survey exhibition closes February 5th. And everyone have a good evening.
Good night.
Um,